Thank you for joining for round two. Thank you for coming back. We're excited to do this all again. Just briefly, hi, I'm Rabbi Becca Walker. I am the engagement rabbi at Beth David, and I'm here with
Rabbi Louis Sachs. I'm the associate rabbi at Beth Tikva, and still a little sore from last week from this fight. So go easy on me tonight, Rabbi.
I've been thinking about lying a lot. It really was thought provoking to me. So I hope it was for you all as well. So this week we're going to be arguing about or talking about tzedakah, which can be translated in many ways, like something around giving. And so we thought that it would be fun because yesterday was Giving Tuesday, which you might know because literally I got like a bajillion emails from every single organization I've ever breathed on to give them money. So kind of just start getting us in this frame of mind. I'm curious about where you don't have to tell me, you don't have to say what organizations. I'm not so concerned about that, but more like what helps you decide when you're giving charity somewhere, when you're giving money to some organization, what are kind of some values you think about? So you can think about like, what are the things, if you did participate in Giving Tuesday, what are the organizations that you wanted to give to? Like, why did you give to those? Or if just, you've given tzedakah anytime over the past year, like what are those things that you think about? Is it,
how do you choose when there's so many people and places sticking their hand out? How do you pick which hand to put something in? If anyone has anything they want to throw into the chat, please.
Yeah, I got my mom here. Hi, Mom. Says food. She likes food. She gives to organizations that give food. Thank you. She probably gives to like chocolate organizations. Andrew says vulnerable populations are a big one for me. Yes, yeah.
Great. Well, we asked this.
I see people type.
Oh, people are typing still. Oh, thank you. That's a great way of doing it to places that you've benefited from, medical particularly, food, deaf, blind.
Okay. Yeah, and then I guess it's like, is it personal? Is it because you or a family member have been personally affected by these issues, or is it more just things that you care about, right, in general? Media giving, the Jewish Israeli point of view.
It's a great cause. Helping to support some Jewish charities, Israeli charities, Hasbara.
Oh, I should stop.
Not as an organization, but putting the message out there. Community-based organizations. Great. So that's really what we're going to talk about tonight, is how do we decide who to give what to? But first we want to talk about that we have to give. And what do you think, Rabbi Walker? Should we start now?
Yeah. Okay. I have to reshare that. I forgot I was screen sharing, and then here we go. Okay. So tzedakah. So before, oh, this is wrong. Hold on. I love when that happens, when it just shows up the wrong screen. That's fun. Okay. So here we go. If this will let me do this, because my computer. Okay, great. Okay. It's just, okay. So here is a text we're going to look at from the Shulchan Aruch, which I really enjoy. It's a Jewish law code. It's a Jewish legal code. And it kind of helps us distill a lot of, right, in the Talmud, there's a lot happening. And we don't always know, there's like different sides arguing, and we don't always know kind of, okay, what does that mean for our everyday lives? And here is one code, one text that helps us distill that distills it for us, actually. Okay, so this is Shulchan Aruch from Yoredea, so the section, and there's tons of stuff in here about tzedakah and charity, but here's what it says. Everyone is obligated to give tzedakah. Even people supported by tzedakah must contribute from what they will receive. Anyone who refuses to give tzedakah or who gives less than what they should give, the court pressures them until they give the amount that they have been assessed. The court may confiscate their possessions and deduct from them an appropriate amount for tzedakah. They may seize possessions worth of the value of the pledge, even on a Friday afternoon. Right? So I think a lot of times we translate tzedakah as charity, but here that's not what this means. Tzedakah is more, it's an obligation. It's this form of, I guess, just giving, but there's more of this obligatory sense of it than just like, oh, this is a nice thing we do. I think we talk about it that way, like, oh, it's so nice that we're doing these things, but there's even more force behind it than just charity. Okay.
I think it's one of those words that often gets misused, like mitzvah doesn't just mean good deed, but commandment. And tzedakah isn't just a nice thing to give. Charity is how people use it, but it's almost in a sense like a tax. The court can impose it and beat it out of you or take your possessions, repossess things. But to me, that is fascinating. The text you shared is that even the poor person who receives it has to still give their own portion from that everybody is obligated in it. And I also, just as we were starting, wanted to share one other text, just on the idea of tzedakah. There are a couple of modern sources. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said, morally speaking, there is no limit to the concern one must feel for the suffering of human beings. That indifference to evil is worse than evil itself, and in a free society, some are guilty, but all are responsible. And he's talking about a lot here more than tzedakah. He's talking about justice. And that's really the root of what tzedakah means. Tzedek is the root, it's justice. We translate it as charity, but it's an act of justice. It's helping to fix something in the world that's morally wrong, that's unjust. And then Viktor Frankl says, being human means being conscious and being responsible. By becoming responsible agents for social change, we actualize not only our humanity, but our mission as Jews. Really getting back, I think, to that core, that the essence of Judaism is that it's justice. It's to make the world right. It's some kind of repairing what's broken. So really, it goes back to the text you shared, Rabbi Walker, that this isn't something optional. It's not something we choose to do. It's something we must do.
Yeah, I think it's just like an interesting reframing. And when I'm talking about tzedakah, I don't usually have that in my mind, and I feel like I want to try and hold that in my mind more now. It's like tzedakah is different from just charity. And yeah.
So what we're going to do tonight is the same thing we did last week. We're going to look at this from a couple of different sides. And again, with the caveat of the whole point of this program is to show people that Judaism has a lot to say about different things. And anyone who tells you Judaism says X, and that's the only Jewish opinion, they're lying to you, frankly. There is a lot in Judaism you'll see tonight when Rabbi Walker and I argue on different sides of this. I think in reality, we were probably closer on this than the last issue. So we flipped a coin to decide who argued for which side. Just to be clear, our arguments don't necessarily reflect our views. They're the sides that we've been randomly selected to argue. But we're going to look at the question of how do we choose who to give to, right? That's why we asked at the beginning. Should we be giving locally? Should we be giving just to Jewish causes? Should we be giving to people in the most need? Can we build a school or a library when people are dying of starvation? Right? What is that answer? So we're going to look at that. Anything else, Rabbi Walker, to add before we dive in?
Nope. Did it well.
All right. So our very first source I want to look at are just a couple of very quick verses from the Torah. This is right from the book of Devarim. If there's a needy person among you, one of your kinsmen, in any of your settlements in the land that the Lord your God is giving you, do not harden your heart and shut your hand against your kinsmen. I want us to really focus on those words, right? Be'achicha, right? That your brother, be'echad b'sharecha, someone in your gates, your kinsman, amecha, that this is really about giving to who? The message I think here is very clear. Straight from the Torah, we're commanded to give to those that are local. We're commanded to give money in our community. We're commanded to give money to Jews. We're commanded to help our, to help make sure our fellow Israelite is not poor and starving. Again, here in the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam codifies this as a positive mitzvah. Again, not a good deed, but an actual commandment to lend to a poor person. As it says, if you lend money to any of my people, right? Ami, any of my people, the word if here is not to be taken as permissive, but obligatory. Thou shalt surely lend him, right? You have to do this. But again, the key word here is ami, my people. People that have accepted our God as their God, which is, again, our fellow Jews. And the Torah is really, I don't want to drill down in here too hard, but that's what the Torah says over and over. Don't deal basically with your countrymen, right? Amecha. Don't stand by the blood of your fellow, re'echa, your neighbor, the person that's near you. If your kinsman, amecha, again, I'm sorry, achicha here in this verse in Leviticus, if your kinsman being in straits comes under your authority, and you hold him as though a resident alien, let him live by your side. Right? We have these again, this resident alien, but they're in our area. They're right there with us. Do not extract from them advance or interest, but fear your God and let your brother live with you. Again, these two verses from Leviticus, and we're looking at one quick comment on it. Just if it wasn't clear, just the pshat, the simple meaning, right? Rabbis like to drash and go into these far off, lofty places. But oftentimes, I'll admit, it's hard to connect it back to the verse. There's a word or a letter or some connection. Here, the verse is very, very clear. Give the money to your fellow, to your brother, to your kinsman, to your neighbor, to God's people. And the Torah here says it very clearly in this commentary. Let your brother live with you. The line is repeated primarily in order to show the reader how important the consideration is in the eyes of the Torah. Onkelos, who is an Aramaic translation of the Torah, demonstrates this in his translation, that he includes the resident stranger as included in the admonition of the Torah to fear the Lord and let your brother live with you. Our sages apply the obligation of strengthening them economically to fellow Jews, whereas they understand the commandment to let him live with you also as the resident stranger. So while there are non-Jews that are allowed to benefit here from this, that we should help out, it's very clear. The main obligation is to our fellow Jews, and to the non-Jews, they're the special category, the resident alien. It's not just some person out there in the world who needs it. It's somebody who's living amongst the Jewish people and has become an active part of our community, supporting Jewish life and Jewish learning and all of that. This is a member of our community, even if they themselves aren't specifically Jewish. The resident alien isn't just any person in the neighborhood or in the area, right? There's very specific things. They are one of us in a lot of ways. So I'll pass it over to you, Rabbi.
Okay. Share my screen. So Rabbi Sachs did a nice job of presenting a lot of the texts in our Torah that are more particularistic, and I'm going to argue that there's also a lot of texts in our Torah and our tradition that value more universal. Here we go. So not just Jews, all people. So here, maybe some of these texts are a little cliche, but they're cliche for a reason. It's because they got good stuff. So I'm going to bring them back out. Right. So the first one here from the very beginning of the Torah, Genesis, Bereshit, chapter 1. This is the text where we get this idea of B'Tselem Elohim, right, being created in the image of God. And I think, yes, we cite this text a lot, but I think if we really think about what it means, here it's really important. Like if all people were created in the image of God, or we're not just talking about Jews here, all people, that means that all people deserve to be treated with respect and dignity and all of that. And so in our giving of tzedakah, we need to make sure that we are giving to all people, to make sure that we are living up to this idea and this ideal, right? So it's not just our own people, but that we're looking out, and this is one way that we can connect to God or the divine and respect God is really recognizing the divine in all people and making sure all people have their needs taken care of. So not just Jews. Okay, and then a next, could go on about that for a while, but I will continue. So the next one is from Exodus. And so here, and there are a lot of quotes like this in the Torah where it talks about you shall not oppress a stranger. right? V'ger lo tilchas, right? It says, you shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings of the stranger, having yourself been strangers in the land of Egypt. It's this idea that, and strangers here, there's different interpretations of v'ger, but this idea that you are, they're outsiders, right? Unfamiliar. And so just this idea that we have to take care. So we also not just actively not oppressing the stranger, but when we're not oppressing someone, it means we're working towards their salvation as well and their freedom as well. And so we are supporting all people, not just Jews, as a part of this. And this phrase is repeated many times. I think around 36 times is one midrash says. There's a lot. This is clearly an important piece of Torah, not oppressing the stranger. And I think we can take this idea and put it into ideas about our charitable giving. And then also this idea of just the phrase tikkun olam that we use a lot. And tikkun olam has a lot of different meanings. It means repair, kind of literally it means repairing the world. Olam is a world. And so kind of in that literal sense, if we're just taking it on that surface view, repairing the world, the whole world, right? Jews aren't the whole world, everyone's the whole world. And so making sure that we are including everyone in this idea. And tikkun olam has been kind of taken to me more recently. We talk about it when we talk about social justice work, but it's also about kind of when you go back to the older sources in the Talmud, it's about like social, like helping keep like social order and systems in place and structures in place to help people and to make sure things are like running smoothly. And even in that way, I think it can still be taken in this universalistic view. So when we're thinking about tikkun olam, repairing the world and kind of protecting creation, right? We all have to be engaged in that. That's not just a solely Jewish effort. That's everyone working together. And so it works both ways there. Okay. Oh. And then I'm going to save this for the next one. So there you go. So there's clearly a worldwide, a universal strain of Judaism, and we have to have our charitable giving correspond to that.
So I'm going to take your sources out of order, but I think they're clearly proof to the correctness of my position. So I appreciate that you shared them, because I don't think they did quite what you were hoping them to do. It's very important. Don't oppress the stranger. We were strangers. We know what it was like to be oppressed. But that's a negative commandment. It's a lo ta'aseh. Do not do something. That doesn't give us a positive obligation from that. We have a separate commandment. The commandment not to do work on Shabbat doesn't tell us that we have to make Kiddush. We have a second commandment to designate Shabbat as holy. Right? We have no positive mitzvah, none in any of those sources that said, give money to the stranger, give money to the foreigner. We simply have, don't oppress them. Don't enslave them. Don't treat them the way we've been treated over and over and over again. But that doesn't give us any kind of a positive must that we have to do. And again, it goes back to the very first idea. We are all created in God's image, and that is a beautiful, beautiful thought. And I really do believe that. I think everyone is holy and everyone deserves to be treated with respect, and everybody in a perfect world would have everything that they need to survive and to do. But sadly, we don't live in a perfect world, right? The Torah was made up in heaven, but lo bashamayim hi, it's down here on earth now. And we have to figure out the best way to handle things. And there's just not enough resources. We don't have enough to be able to help every single person, so we have to pick. And I think our sources there are very clear. So we're going to look at a famous thing here from Bava Metzia. You've, I'm sure, heard it before. I forgot the time myself to see how long I was going. Rabbi, to tell me if I go over my allotment here. But it's a famous idea. There are two people walking on a desolate path, and they have a jug of water in the possession of one of them. I have the water, and I'm with my friend. And if both of us drink, we're not going to have enough water. We're both going to die. But if only one of us drink, then we'll be able to, whoever drinks will be able to make it to a settled area. They'll make it to town, and the other person will die. So Ben Petora taught, it's better that both me and my friend drink and die. Let neither one of them see the death of the other. Right? That's a perfect world we both live. Ben Petora's world, when we give everybody and split everything equally, we both die. But Rabbi Akiva teaches us, the Torah says very clearly, your brother shall live with you, indicating that your life takes precedence over the life of the other. We have limited resources. We can't give everyone everything in the world. At some point, we have to pick our priorities. And I think the texts in the Torah and our tradition are very clear that our priorities have to first and foremost be ourselves, our community, and our people, the immediate surrounding area. And we're going to look at a couple other sources that go ahead and show that. So, for example, right, when we have limited resources, we have to figure out a way to pick. So here we have, our rabbis taught, when a male orphan and a female orphan apply for support, the female orphan should be supported first and afterwards the male orphan, because it's customary for a man to go begging at the doors, but not customary for a woman to go begging at the doors. Right? We can talk about if we agree with this and the idea that there's differences and all of that. But the point of this is very simple. There are different, if there's only enough to support one of them, you have to make a choice. And here the rabbis decide it's better for the male orphan to go door to door asking for money. They can only support one of the two, because it wouldn't be good for the female orphan to do that. When a male orphan and a female orphan come and apply for assistance to be married, we must first help the female orphan to marry and afterwards the male orphan, because the shame of a woman is greater than that of a man. Again, we can disagree in the world today if the same social world that they're basing this off of applies. We might evaluate differently of who gets the money first. But the point is that somebody has to have those funds. Somebody has to be picked. From Shulchan Aruch, we get this idea. Helping one's grown-up sons or daughters in need when he's not obliged to, in order to give his sons an opportunity of studying law, right, Torah, or to keep his daughters on the right path, and presenting gifts to one's father in need, all this comes under the general act of charity. You'll notice in the Hebrew, it actually calls this Zeh B'klal Tzedakah. And in fact, such charity is to be preferred to other forms. It's better to give, according to the Shulchan Aruch here, to your grown-up children, non-dependents, to help them to be able to learn more about Judaism, or to help your children stay on a good path, or to give gifts to help a parent in need, than to give to other causes. Because again, if there's a limited supply, our preference has to be local. Not only a father or a child, but any relative should be given preference to a stranger, a brother of one's father to a brother of one's mother. It's not great to be that uncle. The poor of his own house to the poor of a city at large, the poor of his own city to the poor of other cities, and the poor that dwell in the Holy Land to those that dwell in other lands. Again, it's just that same idea. When we have a limited supply, there's going to have to be a way to pick. So how do we pick? And the rabbis really tie in on this idea of your local community, your fellow Jews, your family. And we might disagree on how we select those priorities, but for them, it seems very clear that we have to make those decisions and there has to be priorities. We're going to look at one more text and then I'll pass it back. Again, sorry, well, two more texts on one topic. This is from Mishnah from Baba Batra. The resident of a courtyard may be compelled by the rest to contribute to the building of a porter's lodge and a door for the courtyard. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, however, says that not all courtyards require a porter's lodge. He, right, the resident of the city, may be compelled to contribute to the building of a wall, folding doors, and a crossbar. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says not all towns require a wall, right? Not every town needs this. How long must a man reside in a town to be counted as one of the townsmen? 12 months. If, however, he buys a house there, he is at once reckoned as one of the townsmen. Right? Forgetting whether or not we decide if this courtyard needs the wall or not, or this city needs the wall. The point here is very simple. When you're a part of a community, you have responsibilities to that community, and you can't neglect those responsibilities for a community somewhere far away. When you're living amongst people, when you have a community, you have to hold up your weight. So once you've been living in a city for 12 months, you're a part of that city. You have to give back to it. And even shorter than that, if you've bought a house there, the source is very clear. You are a part of that community. And that community is where you must give your funds and your time and your effort and all of that. And here in Bava Batra, we see we require that one live in a city for 12 months for all matters. Right? They're asking, is everything this 12-month rule that we get in the Mishnah? Isn't it taught if one lives in a city for 30 days, he has to contribute to the charity, right? For where food is distributed to the poor. And if he lives there for 3 months, he has to give to the charity box, right? Money. And if he lives there for 6 months, he has to contribute to the clothing fund. In 9 months, he must contribute to the burial fund. In 12 months, right? Again, the columns of the city, right? The security fence. Rabbi Asi said that Rabbi Yochanan said, we learned 12 months in the Mishnah, we learned only with the columns, only about security. When you're a part of a community, you get obligations towards that. Here, the longer you're living in this town, after 30 days, you have to give to help people that are hungry. After 3 months, you have to give money for people that need it. After 6 months, you have to contribute for clothes for people who need it. 9 months, you're responsible for burial. And beyond that, after 12 months, or after you buy a house, you're responsible for security. Your responsibilities are to your community. Being a part of a community gives you benefits, and you have an obligation to give them back in your community. We have limited resources. It'd be great. Everybody is created in the image of God. And if I had infinite money, I would give to everyone in the world. There would be no poor. I would also be taking a yacht on my next vacation. But we don't have infinite money, and we have obligations, and it's time to look at those. We can't neglect those around us for some high and mighty idea that there's going to be someone who needs it far away, maybe more. That's their neighbor's responsibility. Our first and foremost responsibility is right here. All yours, Rabbi.
Okay, well, thank you, Rabbi. So I think one of the things before I start sharing my sources, I thought was interesting, that first source you shared, the one about the water jugs and, sharing with the person next to you. And I think I would interpret that as it's about need, right? We're talking about saving a life. And there are places where your money will save a life more than maybe your local community, right? Maybe it's about the greatest need. Who's experiencing the greatest need and the most urgent need, and our money should go there. And so I think that water jug text actually helps. I would read it towards my point, and I will show you a few more texts where it's about where is the need greatest, where, I'll just say that one more time because I kept saying it. So exactly. So where is it most, not desperate, but most, I don't know, someone can write the word in the chat. Okay, so here we go. So I'm going to put it in present mode. So here is a text. This is from Bava Metzia. That's a weird citation, 71a. Right? And maybe you might look at this text and think this is a good text for Rabbi Sachs, but actually it's a good text for me, and I will tell you why. So this is from the Talmud, from Bava Metzia, and it says here, Rabbi Joseph learned, if you lend money to any of my people that are poor with you, this teaches that the choice lies between a Jew and a non-Jew. A Jew has preference, right? This is kind of along the lines of what you were saying earlier, Rabbi Sachs. The poor or the rich, the poor takes precedence. You're poor, and the poor of your town, the poor comes first. The poor of your city and the poor of another town, the poor of your town have prior rights. Okay, so on a surface read, it sounds like I'm arguing for the other side here, but I think here it's about more than just, okay, who has preference. But here's the Hatam Sofer. He has a commentary on this, and so I like his read. So here's what he says. He says, if there's a poor person within your gates, the Sifrei, which is a midrash, expounds on this verse, saying, when one is starving, the one who is starving takes precedence. And then expounds, the poor of your city take precedence over the poor of another city. That is to say, this applies if both poor need food or clothing. However, if the poor of your city have what they need to live, but just don't have any extra money, then the poor of the other city take precedence over the poor of your city. For the neediest takes precedence. So I think right here, we're talking about who is the neediest, who can we help the most, right? And we think about examples. If we give, $5 to something here, we're not going to get that much out of it. But if we give $5 to a place where people live on $1 a day, $5 is literally like a whole week's worth of food versus, maybe you can, buy a couple of cans of food, right? So there's increased efficacy and increased needs in certain areas. Okay, so nope, I have to go backwards. No, this is, oh no. So it happens. I need to learn how to use PowerPoint better. Okay, so I'm going to go back to, here we go. So this is a text from Isaiah. This, you might recognize it because it's, we read it on Yom Kippur, so it's a good one. I think we talked about another text we read on Rosh Hashanah last week with lying, but that was from the Torah. So here we have a Yom Kippur one from the Haftorah from Isaiah, and right, Isaiah is talking about seeing all the Israelites and they're praying, and God gets mad because God's like, I don't care that you're being all pious, you're not doing what's right and what's just, and that's what I really care about. So this is what God is saying. God says, no, this is the fast I desire, to unlock fetters of wickedness and untie the cords of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke. It is to share your bread with the hungry and to take the wretched poor into your home. When you see the naked, to clothe him, and not to ignore your own kin. Then shall your light burst through like the dawn, and your healing spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall march before you. The presence of God shall be your rear guard. Then when you call, God will answer. When you cry, God will say, here I am. And so this idea that we have to give, we have to share our bread with the hungry, or we have to clothe the naked, and I think especially now, like when we talk about seeing, we can see people all over the world. We have an awareness now because of technology that we really are aware of when people are hungry and when people need clothing all over the world. And so it's our responsibility when we see this, no matter where it is, that we take this into account. Okay, one other text. Okay, so here's another one when we're talking about if we're giving kind of locally and to specifically Jewish causes versus globally, and including non-Jews and other outside people. So here is from the Talmud again, because I clearly love the Talmud, from Tractate Gittin, and it says, our rabbis taught, Tanu Rabbanan, we sustain the non-Jewish poor with the Jewish poor, visit the non-Jewish sick with the Jewish sick, and bury the non-Jewish dead with the Jewish dead for the sake of peace. It's so this idea, and in Hebrew for the sake of peace, is mipnei darkei shalom. So if you want to, you can read this on like kind of a pessimistic level of like, okay, we support both Jews and non-Jews because like, if we don't, it kind of looks bad, right? That's the pessimistic way to read it. But even if we're reading it that way, I think it's clear to say that it's important to support both, that we can't just look after our own people or like our own like little bubble, but we have to kind of be more expansive than that. And, because either so that we can gain trust of other people and they won't just think we're all self-involved, or just for building relationships or whatever it is, but right, there's this value of making sure we sustain both, not just the Jewish poor, but also the non-Jewish poor, and also do acts of kindness kind of beyond just money, right? We're talking more specifically about money now, but yes, it can kind of go beyond that as well. And then I love this from Rabbi Arthur Waskow, who wrote kind of a commentary about this little piece. So here, for the sake of the passive piece, right, which is from here, right? So we say for the sake of peace here. And so his interpretation of this is, he said, the rabbis, non-Jews as well as Jews should be given tzedakah. This phrase has two sides. It can be understood either as grudging or as transformative. It might mean that although non-Jews are not really entitled to be helped, keeping peace in the world requires that they be given help, right? So that's kind of the pessimistic interpretation that I brought up. Or, here we go, or it can be understood to mean that for the sake of shalom, the highest communal good and goal, right? Because that word shalom means like wholeness and peace. It's something we aspire to, right? So for the sake of shalom, the highest communal good and goal, it is not only an obligation, but a joy to help all human beings. It may be whichever aspect of this phrase spoke most deeply to people, the fearful and prudential one, or the one that was visionary and hopeful, depended on what relationships between Jews and their neighbors were at any given time and place. In our own generation, when most Jews are not oppressed or outcast, both the prudential and the hopeful may fuse into one. And so I really like this idea that when we're in this text here, when we say, oh, we need to give to Jews and non-Jews together for the sake of peace, it means for the sake, right? This is the way we kind of live to the highest values and the highest achievements that we can as Jews, is we're promoting peace, we're promoting wholeness, we're living up to our values by saying, you know, we care about you, even though you're not a part of us, we still care about you. And we are helping to kind of foster that among other people, because I think if we're only interested in ourselves and other people are only interested in themselves, right, we're not going to have this this blending and this help and this mutual aid. Whereas if we are working together, helping each other, right, like the famous quote from Hillel, who says, you know, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, who am I? And kind of both of those, right there, he says both, because they're both intention, because we need to have both. And we need to make sure that we are looking out into the world and supporting each other and doing that for the sake of peace, and also just for the betterment of the world, right? Going after where the most drastic need is, and making sure that we're doing that, whether that's to save a life, to feed the hungry, wherever it is. So there you go.
It's an interesting question, right? You said that the pessimistic way of reading that is, you know, to make them like us, kind of like for the ways of peace, like everyone gets along, you know, so people don't like talk bad. But that's a very modern and I think radical way of reading it. We have to put ourselves in the mindset of maybe not the last 40 years here in North America, right? What you and I have experienced, but even I have congregants that talk to me about how, you know, they would get beat up in Montreal walking home from Passover Seders and things like that. Jews have been hated in every society, in every place. And that hate hasn't been, you know, some mean comments on the internet. That's been physical violence. It's been pogroms. It's been massacres. And I think that's really what the text is talking about, for the sake of peace, so that our neighbors don't come and murder us out of hatred and anti-Semitism. We have to pay them a little bit. We have to make nice to appease them, because if we're only here and we have money, right? What's always been the complaint about Jews throughout history? We've been accused of having money and having funds and, right, bags of gold and all of that. I mean, just the fact someone here commented, right? What about now? Why don't we bury non-Jews in the same cemetery as Jews? Right? And I think that just goes to show that this is not normative halakha. It's a very radical reading of that text. Rashi is the answer to that. He says right away on this that it's talking about if there's Jewish bodies you come upon and non-Jewish bodies mixed together, you have to make sure that the non-Jewish bodies, you know, get buried and get treated appropriately. But it's not about putting them in the Jewish cemetery. It's not about total equality. It's about supporting our community. It's very, very pragmatic, that text, I think. But I want to look at a few other texts to really drive it in. So the first part was this idea Rabbi Walker had about kind of the greatest need. And that makes a lot of sense, I want to say. It's very, very reasonable to give our money to the greatest need, where it can make the biggest difference. Peter Singer is a philosopher who talks a lot about this. And effective altruism, if you've heard that phrase, is the cool term for that. And it's about giving your money where it can do the most good. He says you could give $5 to a homeless person in New York and you could buy them, you know, a meal from McDonald's, or you could give $5 to a person in Africa that lives on, you know, 30 cents a day, and you could feed them for weeks. And right, or the difference between buying someone glasses versus saving a life-saving surgery. But who are we to decide whose need is greater? How are we as finite beings capable of making those types of decisions? Right? It gets really, really messy deciding who gets to give it and who gets to receive and who doesn't based off of that. And I just want to look at a couple of texts. So this first text, I think, speaks to the first part of the issue, which is, sure, there might be someone in greatest need, but what are the consequences of that? You hold your fellow. Do not let your fellow slip until they fall completely, for then it'll be difficult to raise them up. Rather, strengthen your fellow as they begin to fall. To what is this comparable? To a burden upon a donkey. While it's still on the donkey, one person can hold it and set it in place. If it falls to the earth, even 5 people cannot set it back. Right? This is on a commentary on a verse from Leviticus. You're supposed to hold up your fellow Jew when they fall in from their donkey. When they slip and they fall, you have to hold them up. Once they've hit rock bottom, it's going to take a lot more money to build them up. It's better when there are people that are struggling to put our money there where it can help, I could argue. Sure, you could feed somebody in another country, but how much more are you going to have to feed them, and how long, and when does it end? When there's a society there and a system built that's unjust and that makes it impossible for people to move on to the next level. We see the violence in different parts of the world versus here when there's someone struggling in our local community. Even if we're more prosperous in other communities, we want to make sure that even that the lowest amongst us are propped up, because if we let anybody fall, it's going to take a lot more work to lift them back up, right? Once you have a community where everybody is homeless, right, you have a tipping point. Once the more and more people you let that happen to, the more and more people there are that are in need, and the harder the problem comes to fix. It's better if you have, but it'd be easy in the other logic to say, if this town only has 10 homeless people, but that town has 1 million homeless people, we should give our money to the town with the 1 million. But our money is actually going to help a lot more if we can prevent this town from becoming the next town with 1 million homeless people, being able to help them up while they still have a chance. Another source that I want to look at, scrolling down to it. Right, again, it's this idea of their limited resources, and we have to be able to make our best choice. So if many poor seek help and there's not enough money in the treasury to help them all, right? We saw the Chatam Sofer, but he's a chassid. Their take on it isn't necessarily the traditional take. So let's go right to the source in Shulchan Aruch and see here. You have many people seek help and there's not enough money in the treasury to help them all. A priest is given preference before a Levite before an ordinary Israelite, an Israelite before, right, the halal, the issue of a marriage forbidden to the priest, halal before a child of an unknown father, right? It gives us a criteria. We might disagree with this criteria, but it's recognizing something very important here, which is that we have limited funds. We have to make choices. We have to figure out who we're going to help. And in some ways, it's okay to make those choices selfishly. Notice who they're picking here. They're picking people that society here needs. If we're talking about a future of Judaism, we need priests, right? Not today, we don't have them anymore. We have rabbis, so please donate to your local rabbi. But joking. But the point here is they're talking about the importance of ensuring the future of the people, right? They're making a priority here. If between a bastard and a scholar and between a bastard, a scholar, and a high priest, an ignoramus, the scholarly bastard is given the preference, right? So it's not just about status in society. The person here, the mamzer, who is a scholar in Torah versus the high priest who doesn't know anything, they want you to give to the person who comes from low social status, but that has that Torah knowledge over the person of high social status that doesn't have it. Because they're concerned here again on the communal level. Their concern is about there being a future of the Jewish people and it to be able to continue to be passed down. If the father or teacher of the charity distributors among the poor seeking aid, the teacher or father is given preference, even if there's a far greater scholar among them. Again, right, our family has to be a priority. If my sibling needed money to make their rent or they're going to be homeless, but there were people that were dying of starvation in another country, I'll say it. I would be a monster to not give that money to my sibling to keep a roof over their head. Even if the other person is going to die, who can turn their back on a sibling like that? We have responsibility to family. I would love a world where I had enough to help them both out. But sadly, I'm in a world where we don't have that. That's just not the way it is. I want to look at one more on this topic. Sorry, I apologize. I keep doing that. I want to look at two more on this topic, but I'll throw it back shortly if I have time. Tell me if I don't have time, Rabbi Walker. Somebody asked the question in the group about, right, who do we have to help and how much? But this is the answer. The Torah uses this verse. We saw it earlier. Sufficient for their deficiency. That's the way the phrase is said in the Torah, right? And it teaches that you're commanded with respect to the pauper to support him, but you're not commanded with respect to make him wealthy. You don't have to make the poor person wealthy. You have to give them their basic needs, right? Whatever they lack. But this is what's interesting. What is deficient for a person? And according to the rabbis here in the Talmud, even a horse upon which to ride and a servant to run in front of him for the sake of his stature if necessary. For someone accustomed to these great advantages, their absence is a true deficiency, not an extravagant indulgence. I can feel the eyes rolling. But your eyes are now rolling at Hillel that you quoted earlier, because Hillel the elder obtained for a poor person of noble descent a horse to ride and a servant to run in front of. And one time he couldn't find a servant, and instead he himself ran in front of him because he recognized for that person to not have a servant running in front of him and a horse to ride on was so painful that it was worse than for someone else who might have tattered clothing, because it's taking something else in here. We can't just evaluate, right, like a formula. For one person, wearing nice clothes might not mean as much to another person. But we're talking about not just the physical quality of their being, but their mental well-being as well. And that's what Hillel's recognizing here, that it's very hard to gauge. That for one person, what would be tzedakah is to give them a horse and a servant, which is an obligation, while for another person, it might just be a bowl of soup and a new t-shirt, right? Our obligation varies person to person. And in the final one, here we go. One final source on this. The Gemara raises a contradiction. There's a statement of Rabbi Yossi, and they're talking about how do we decide what to do. There's a spring, the city has a river, and it belongs to the residents of this city. And if they need the water for their lives, they're allowed to drink it and use it at the expense of whoever lives downstream, even if it's going to mean their lives. Right? There's only enough water for one of the two towns to drink. The town further upstream gets to drink. They have the water. They have it. They don't have to give up their life for anyone else. Likewise, if the water is for their own animals or for the animals of the other town, their own animals take precedence, right? The same idea. And if it's for their laundry versus the laundry of the next town, their laundry takes precedence, right? This seems to be what Rabbi Walker was arguing, right? But we have to gauge the need, because if it's their life and our animals or our clothes, it would seem that obviously we have to put their life before it. It's only when it's life for life, animal for animal, clothes for clothes, that we get to choose it first, just because we live further up and have the water first. But Rabbi Yossi says even their own laundry takes precedence over the lives of others, because wearing unlaundered clothes can lead to suffering and danger down the line. right? Rabbi Yossi said refraining from laundering when clothes involves pain and affliction, right? It's again that problem of how do we predict the future of our consequences? We're not genies. We don't all have little globes to see the future of what every choice and every consequence is. We have to just make them as best as we can. And in this case, our needs come first. The Torah is very clear. The rabbis are very clear. The commentators are very clear. And I hope I've been very clear. Our needs come first. If we could give to everyone, that'd be wonderful. But when you have to make a choice, Judaism says the choice is clear and the choice is easy. And again, your local rabbi comes first. Now, Rabbi Walker, your turn. Trying to lighten the mood a bit.
I didn't like that text. That was interesting. I don't know. I mean, I think that, right, there's like so much tension between this idea of, putting ourselves first. Well, what does that mean, right? Is that actually in regards to charitable giving? I think there's, we need to look out for our own self-interest, and I think we shouldn't, be selfless and kind of give up the things that we need. But I think this is talking about beyond that, right? It's not about the river. Like we have a river and we have enough water to do all these things and do the laundry in it. But we also need to, make sure that we can like help, build some irrigation for another town that doesn't have any water, right? So I think that's at least how I'm viewing it, right? That there is this idea that we need to preserve ourselves, and that's definitely here in Judaism and saving our own lives. But then once we have enough to go beyond that, we have to go beyond that. And I think also, I mean, part of what's interesting and hard, and maybe you all listening along or picking up on this, is there's so many different ideas around tzedakah in our text, because there's also like different categories. There are different like places that Jews were commanded to give. There are different communal funds that Jews would give into for various things, right? Like how, Lewis, you were talking about, there's the treasury and kind of what is the priorities for when someone goes to the treasury. And I would argue that some of those things aren't really under the scope of charitable giving anymore. I would say that that's more like Social Security, right? Like everyone kind of pays a tax into the government, and the government has a certain amount of money, and that centralized thing gives out the money according to whatever system, right? And you detail that system, and I think that this is beyond that, right? Like, so of course in Canada, right, we pay into, I think, Social Security, right? Like some Canadian Social Security. I don't know. I moved here recently-ish, so I'm still figuring out all of these structures, but right, so we pay into something, like we pay taxes into something, and then that money is given out to people who need it, and right, locally in Canada, because the people who pay into it are Canadians. But I think this is beyond this. This is more about right, giving that's looking out for others' needs around the globe. So we're not just talking about, okay, how is this, one community deciding how to distribute the communal funds, but it's how are we each deciding to give kind of beyond that, beyond just that like Social Security type thing. And there's a lot more there too, in terms of that there's not only needing to give money, but there's also commandments around leaving corners of your field for those who are hungry, and putting aside a certain amount for priests. There's like so many different ways that in the Torah and in the Talmud we're talking about like giving charitably, and Rabbi Sachs even mentioned some about like the different funds when you're living like 3 months or 6 months versus 9 months, right? So there are all of those, but I feel like this is almost beyond that. So yes, I'm just looking at my notes. And then I think also part of a tension here, I think, is that sometimes all of these things need to almost go beyond tzedakah, right? Like we're talking about needing to do like structural change. So when you're talking about, helping, okay, there's only a few people homeless, right? To keep that load on the donkey and to keep it from falling off, like we need to think about how do we help create societies where it's not even possible for the load to fall off, right? Like how do we kind of help ensure that these things don't happen? Okay, so then I'm also going to have some text for you all to look at. I see lots of good things in the chat. I'm excited to go through those. Okay, so I want to do another look at this text that I shared with you earlier. Again, this is the Bava Metzia text around, right, kind of picking a Jew and non-Jew. The Jewish preference, the poor, the rich, the poor takes precedence. You're poor, and the general poor v'chana, you're poor, come first, right? This idea of like the local first. And one way that I interpreted it, right, or that, which is taking from the Chatam Sofer, is that it's about the greatest need. But I also think that we can learn through this text that it's about like local people know best what they need. So it's not about, oh, we only give to our local people, but when we are thinking about charitable giving, we're giving to organizations that are local, that help the local people. And so here's an example. So locals of the location know their needs best. So here's one that didn't work and the one that did work, right? So the American Red Cross, when in Haiti, when was this? I think it was 2014 something. So right, they raised a ton of money, like $500 million, to give aid to the people of Haiti, and after a hurricane. And right here, they built 6 houses. They used $500 million to build 6 houses. It was like this massive failure. This picture is from a ProPublica article. They're this non-profit investigative journalism organization. They have a lot of great stuff. So if you don't know about them, check them out. But they did this whole really deep dive investigation into what happened, and a big part of it is that the Red Cross, right, it's this American organization, and they go into Haiti and they don't know the culture, right? They don't have the cultural competencies. They don't even really know what people want or what people need, right? Like I don't know, I know for me, like sometimes I think I'll know what other people need, but I don't actually know, right? Like I don't live there. I don't understand what's most important to them or like what works. And one of the problems was that they're like trying to build these things and they realized that people didn't even like want to live where they were building them, right? And they didn't even think to check because they're like, oh, obviously we're building houses, so it doesn't matter. But right, so like this idea that when we give to these organizations that aren't necessarily local, they don't actually know what needs to be done on the ground. It's not the best use of money, and there's overheads. And one of the things the article talks about is that a lot of times the Red Cross would contract out to other local organizations. And so then you have like 2 overheads, right? Because you have the overhead of all the Red Cross people doing whatever it is, and then you have the overhead of this other organization, and then they're doing the actual work. So, it's like a third or a half of all the money that was raised is going to overheads. And of course you need some money to go to overheads in some ways, but that was just kind of extreme. And so this is this example of when it goes terribly wrong, and not giving locally, but giving to this organization that then goes in and thinks they know what they're doing and they don't. And then on the other side of this is this is a really interesting charity. I heard about this because I like to listen to podcasts, and this was one there was a Planet Money about it. It's on NPR, and I was talking about this charity called Give Directly. And their whole thing is that they literally just give money to people who are poor, like no strings attached. And so the piece I was listening to specifically talked about Kenya, and they have in Kenya, there's this very like complex network where it's very easy to send money, right? Like basically everyone has a cell phone. It's very easy to wire people money. So they would just wire people $1,000. And at first there's the skepticism, like you're just wiring people $1,000, like they might waste it, right? But what they actually found out was it was actually very effective. And here is a screen grab of some of that evidence of these research studies they've done that shows how effective it is, right? So instead of saying, oh, I think I know what you need, like I think I know, whoops, sorry, stop share. I think I know what you need because like I imagine, blah, 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 you just give the money to the people. And so like one interesting piece is, so they found that a lot of people were buying these like tin roofs because usually they live in houses, this particular place in Kenya, they live in houses with like kind of grass on top. It would be like grass and mud kind of put on the roof. And they, switched over when these people were given money. A lot of them would buy a tin roof, and it was like, is this a waste of money? Like, what's going on? Why are they like that doesn't seem necessary. And what they realized was actually the tin roof was more than just having like a nice roof, but it prevented them from having to repatch their roof multiple times a season, because the grass, after the rain and stuff, the roofs would start to kind of disintegrate. And not only that, but the grass was really expensive. So people would have to buy this grass every time. And so not only did it save them time, but also save them money. So in the long run, this investment in a roof saved them both time and money, and put them in a much better spot than they would have been without it, right? And the people who are doing this, who are part of this, were like, had no idea, right? They didn't know that that was a need. But it's this idea that the local people and the people themselves know best what they need and how to allocate those resources. And then of course this fund there's no overhead. So I think that the idea of globally, I think there's an idea of greatest need and how do we fix that greatest need. And I think there's also, I'm going to read this local piece as investing in the local organizations that know the people best. Instead of just talking about our own local, is talking about trusting the local communities to know and to help and to kind of contribute to those needs, but also trust them and not think that like we know better. So Lewis, Rabbi Sachs.
Great. I appreciate it, because I feel a little bit there like you helped make my argument, right? It's great that one charity worked out very well, but that's the point, is our local people know what to do, right? They know what their needs are, they know what their cause is, and our biggest impact can be done, right, on the local level here in our communities. I want to look at one final short set of sources. And it's, I think, an interesting question about why is it, right, that there's this priority being given here for these Jewish sources. So I want to just think about it. Rabbi Judah the prince, right, Yehuda Hanasi, grieved that he had given his bread to an illiterate person, right, assumedly an illiterate Jew, an Am Haaretz, because those years were years of dearth, and what the illiterate ate might have been given to a scholar. He was saddened. So this is no like small person. This is the author of the Mishnah. This is a major figure in rabbinic literature. He was so upset. He was grieving that he'd given bread to an ignorant Jew as opposed to an educated Jew, because it was a year of scarcity. If it had not been a year of scarcity, he would have been obliged to sustain him. But if one is on the point of starvation, he must be given food, even though there's a possibility that a scholar will later be in need on account of it, right? This is about that mix. You don't know what's going to happen in the future, right? He's not sure, but we have these competing values. So let's look at what those values are, right? One value is, right, these are both people in front of him. Another value here is Torah. There's something here that's very important to the rabbis about making sure that Torah is sustained. Because again, it goes into the question of we don't know what the consequences are. Right? It can look very cruel here. What Rabbi Yaakov Yeshayahu Blau says here in Tzedakah Mishpat, charity to strengthen Torah study is superior to charity for the poor. Right? That sounds very, very callous, right? How can you build a fancy new day school when people are starving in the streets? But he says it's obligatory for the members of a city to purchase all communal needs, to build a synagogue, purchase a Torah scroll and other books that people can study from, hire a rabbi with a halachic authority and a cantor, and to pay tuition for children whose parents cannot pay tuition and to build a mikveh for the town as well, right? His concern here is for something bigger than any one of those individuals that's benefiting from it. His concern is for the Jewish people. And if we look at statistics, Jews give disproportionately to charities, not just locally, but in Israel and around the world. And imagine what it would be like a world without Jews. Not even from a world where, God forbid, right, those who hate us want out, but just from a lack of ability, that there was no one left to teach Torah. There were no buildings for Jews to gather in. There were no places for Jews to go to learn, to study. What would that detriment be to the world if in a generation or two generations, because there's always going to be somebody that's hungrier, always going to be somebody that's more and more homeless that needs it more for for a wide variety of good reasons. I'm not saying they aren't good reasons, but if we focus only on that immediate need and don't look to the future, right, that can change very, very quickly. We have here, again, in the same vein, my final two sources. And we're not going to do this whole one, it's a long one. But the Shulchan Aruch says, monies donated for the purpose of the synagogue or the cemetery may, if the community see fit to do so, be diverted for the use of the house of study or the maintenance of a religious school, right? Because they're more important than synagogues. Even against the will of the donors. But money collected for the support of a school cannot be commuted to the synagogue, right? There's a very powerful statement here about education because it's about the future. And none of us are equipped to decide what are the best consequences. None of us are equipped to really make those decisions. We saw here with the example of the Red Cross. This is an organization that does good work and raised a lot of money. And you would think that they could do more good than Joe Schmo right here in the corner could with that money that we donated to them. But you don't know what the future is going to be. It's unpredictable. So one of the things that the rabbis and the Torah are concerned with is ensuring that the future includes Torah. And that as long as the future includes Torah, we're going to be working towards a more just world. We're going to be working to a world filled with tzedakah, with tzedek. And that if that's the ultimate priority here, right, is that that's the world we're going to live in, is a world that has Torah in it. And the final source, which I think your example of local was perfect, Rabbi Walker. There's this idea in Judaism, ein mavrin al hamitzvot. And it comes up all over their halakha, but this is one of the early examples of it. They're talking about the process of what the high priest did in the temple. Abai is talking about the removal of ash from the inner altar. It goes from the ash from this corner and this corner and this part of the lamp and that part of the lamp. Someone says, what is the reason? And Abaye says, I learned it through tradition. I don't know why that's how the priest cleans up the ash on the altar, but that's how he does it. But then Rava answers, and it says it's in the name of Reish Lakish, who said, Ein ma'avrin al mitzvot, that you don't forego the performance of one mitzvah in order to do another one. You do the mitzvah that's closest to you. You don't pass over a chance to do a mitzvah. You don't pass over a chance to do tzedakah. When there's a local need, you don't go chasing after something more pressing. Because I promise you, there is always going to be somebody that needs it more. And you're going to hold on to that dollar forever if you're always looking at who needs it the most. Who? Because you'll find someone in another town that's hungrier, someone in another town that has more children that needs to be under a roof. Again, I don't want to sound like I'm callous. I'm saying that that's awful and everybody deserves help. But you don't pass over somebody in need to look for somebody else because it's an endless cycle. And with that, I'll pass it over. That's my concluding remarks. Rabbi Walker, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think this idea of not passing over one to find another, I mean, right, how do we interpret that now when we're getting emails from all over the world? Like, does it mean, do we just do the first click? I think that in some ways, almost like the global is local now with the way technology is. And instead of searching for something to give it within our community, when we see that there's a need somewhere else, that we give it there. I think one of the pieces, one of the texts you raised about the priority of education, right, and not being able to give money to the shul when it needs to be in education, and talking, you spoke about the future, and I think that giving globally and giving not just in our Jewish community is about the future, and making sure that we're investing in other people's educations as well, and kind of on the whole, we are all of our faiths are bound together, and so we can artificially take ourselves out of the rest of the people, but actually we are all living in a society where we're mixed up, and where our outcomes affect other people's, and theirs affect us, and I think that we have to take that sensibility into our giving, into our charitable giving. And I think that when we're talking about priorities, of course, our texts are more limited in thinking about priorities in the Jewish community, because back then, like, it was a lot more, Jews weren't mixed into society in the same way that we are now. And so it makes sense that like those priorities only really address Jewish people. But I think we can really extrapolate them now, and to think about, okay, who do we want to lift up in our society, and what are those values, and how do we do that, and how do we reflect that in our charitable giving. And yeah, I think I'll just go back to, I don't have more sources here, but just to go back to all of these ideas of greatest need, and we need to look beyond our communities. I don't know about you, but I definitely don't want, I would not be proud of some of those texts you showed if some of my non-Jewish friends saw them. I might be a little embarrassed about like what it says about how we need to take such a priority on ourselves that, we do our laundry before we give people water to drink. And I think that those are there, and those are, right, those reflect a certain sensibility. There was a certain time where things were hard, and I think that was also an exaggeration in a way. And I think that we need to break out of that and look at our texts that talk about greatest need, and look at our texts that talk about tikkun olam, repairing the world, and being more broad and universal, and thinking about how we can really help the world, and we can help so much. And I think that's why Jews, we give greatly, and we do give disproportionately, because we see that importance, and because our texts and our Jewish sensibilities show us the importance of giving, and not just to our communities, but to where the need is greatest. And I will conclude my remarks there.
Shkoach.
Shkoach to you.
I want, when we do the recording online, there to be a big disclaimer at the bottom, right? These do not represent the views of these rabbis, or at least, but I think that that's really what this is about, that there's a middle ground. We pick these two extremes to show different sides of the sources. But I got a question from someone asking, what do people teach in synagogues? Do they teach kids to do community service just for the Jewish community or for the larger community? And I don't know. I think it's a false dichotomy in a sense, kind of what we set up here, Rabbi. I don't know about you, but
yeah, I mean, I think that it's a false dichotomy, because it's also like in our text, I think that there are, right, like we're both arguing a side, but our texts clearly support both sides. And it's not because our texts are like a paradox or hypocritical, right? It's because both of those values exist at the same time. And that's what we're kind of drawing out.
Exactly. We're in one of those both and situations, that it's really not about picking one or the other, but seeing kind of the nuance there in all of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I will say, like, one of the things we didn't really address here, because there's just like so much, is beyond just monetary giving, beyond just the greatest need, but like, what does it look like to support, I was reading a lot about, it's not just kind of food, but there's like this idea of like spiritual nourishment, right? And kind of those values of beyond just, okay, like, where does the food need to go? But like, how are we giving kind of beyond that? And that there is value, and our Jewish tradition does give value to giving to, like, synagogues, but also cultural institutions and things like that, beyond just kind of that basic survival.
No, absolutely. It goes, I think, to that question of the future. If we got rid of all art, because we put all of our money towards feeding people, I don't know what kind of a society we would create in a generation or 2 generations. We had a comment here from someone about global issues such as climate change and poverty that drives much, if it is predicted to affect most of us at a local scale in the next 50 to 100 years. If we ignore global issues and focus only at the local scale, we may reach a tipping point where the local scale suffers as a result. But again, if we're talking about climate change, I don't know where that falls under someone immediately who's hungry. But we have to look both towards both problems, people that are suffering right now, and the fact that if we don't address these other issues, there'll be maybe millions of people or billions of people or everyone suffering in 50 years, 100 years, 200 years. And I think that goes to the why they talk about building schools at the expense of hungry people. Right, that there's something to it. Are we doing the poll again, Rabbi? Do you want to put the poll up?
Yeah, we can do the poll. I don't know, I'm just looking. There's so many good questions.
That's what I was gonna say. People sent me some private questions
comments.
as well and
Yeah.
stuff. But if anyone has a question, we'll try to go through them. But send it again in the chat, or if you didn't send one, and you have a new question, we'll do a little Q&A now.
Yeah.
Or Rabbi Walker sets up the poll.
Yeah, I'll put the poll up. Okay, here we go. Launching the poll. There you go.
Sanders
so
comments
it's the same
great.
poll.
Oh, sorry. Explain the poll, or?
Oh, just the same one as last time. So it's like a 1 to 5 scale. How much were you influenced based on what you heard? 1 out of all 5, very influenced. And then did you learn something new today? Both are winners. Thank you, Ruth.
I think Sandra's question is great. Sometimes we give to teach others to fish, and sometimes it might be immediate needs, right? That's the ultimate goal in Rambam. It's interesting, neither of us brought up Rambam's 8 levels of charity, but the highest one is to not give someone stuff, but to teach them how to be self-sufficient, or to give them what they need to become self-sufficient, to not make them reliant on tzedakah and charity always.
Mm-hmm.
Any other good questions you saw you want to do?
Well, I think there's a lot of good comments. I like this one. The verb to give is a palindrome. To use the same frontwards and backwards. The act of giving not only gives something to recipient, but returns it in kind to the giver. Yeah, like that there's this idea in kind of altruism that is it actually altruistic? Like that there is this idea that we benefit in a way from giving, and that's definitely there.
I don't know if you or Marlene's a fan of Friends, but there's a great episode of Friends where that's what it's about. The whole time Phoebe's trying to prove that there's such a thing as a selfless act. But she decides that since every time she helps someone, it makes her feel good, that there is no such thing as a selfless act, she finds. Lionel had a good question. Do rabbis see any inconsistency in the accumulation of significant wealth and the ongoing obligation of tzedakah? Rabbi Walker?
That's really, I mean, there's right where we're taught to like give away, there's this idea of giving away like 10%. I don't know. I feel like there's this idea, like the accumulation of wealth now in the world, like people accumulate so much more wealth than they did kind of back in the day when these texts are talking about. And so, right, like we didn't have billionaires during the Talmudic times. Yes, I'm sure there was like a rich person, but I mean, I think, I'm not sure.
It's interesting because we have that idea of the 10% that you have to give. But there's also sources that say you're not allowed to give more than 1/5. And the fear is that you might give so much that you're yourself going to become eventually reliant on it. And I know later commentaries explain that limit's only when, you don't, right, that you're wealthy, but there's a limit. But when you have 50 billion in the bank, there's no fear that if you give 5 billion away or 10 billion away, that 40 billion is not going to be enough for you to live on, that you're eventually going to be poor. So they say you can give away more in that case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Here,
so
I'm going to show it.
Sorry. I said the accumulation of wealth. I'm sorry. I'll stop. I'm done. You talk.
It's hard. Zoom is hard. Okay. Yeah, right. So we didn't even talk about like this idea of I think this fishing piece is also almost related to structural change. There's this story that I heard kind of in my community organizing training where I talk about like there's a person sitting at a river and they see this baby like coming down the river drowning, and they jump in the river and they save the baby, and then they see another one and they jump in, they save the baby, and right, they're always like kind of jumping in the water saving the baby, and so that's kind of like this tzedakah, this like immediate need, like we're giving the food to the person, but then like no one kind of goes up, like we need to actually go up the river and see like where the babies are being dropped and why that's happening, right? And so there's kind of that band-aid fix the immediate thing, because obviously like the baby needs to get out of the water, but in order for us to make real progress, we have to figure out like why it's happening and what's happening. And I think there's that piece, right, of like how do we change the structures, how do we make it possible for someone to become self-sufficient, or for people to be able to live, to earn a living wage and all of that, so that we don't necessarily have to keep giving, right? So that the society can support itself. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. 75% of you voted, so good job. That's a C. And here are the results. Okay. We didn't do as well as last time. They're only influenced a little, or maybe it's just that we have more strongly held beliefs around this. But we got a lot of people learned something today. So
that's
good.
the
Some
important
people are
one,
not
Pete.
sure.
That's the big question, right? That people learn something new. So I look at that as a success. Any final questions or comments before we wrap up?
Oh, I mean, if some people couldn't unmute themselves, I can change that.
Okay.
There you go. But yeah, we saw lots of good questions. I mean, these are lots of, right? I think that if anything, we saw there's so many different competing ways to give, and clearly other people have, you have your priorities as well that I think would fit in here too.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think that's what this whole class is about, right? That there are different sides to every issue in Judaism. And we hope everyone will join us again next week. We have one more of these. And if it continues to be popular, we'll hopefully put some more of these together, because I really enjoy doing these with you, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Do we want to reveal the topic for next week, or do we want to make people show up for it?
Oh, you can reveal it.
I believe next week the question, right, is it intention that matters or action that matters? Which at the end of the day matters most, our intention or our action? So hopefully, you'll join us.
It's gonna get messy.
I don't intend for that to happen, but if it does,
it'll be good. It'll be good.
I see one more hand up. We have Marion.
Yeah, I just feel that a lot of us do a lot of volunteer work, which to me equates to money, but that doesn't mean that we have a lot of money to give to tzedakah. And I don't feel that the volunteer is given the same kind of platitudes, whatever you want to call it, the same sense of being that people who put money out. I just don't have that kind of money to give out, but I give a lot of time to volunteerism, and I wondered what your take was on that, on volunteerism.
Yeah, thank you for raising that, Marion. And I think
being able to give money, if you're giving up yourself.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we didn't dive into this because only so much time, but there are sources that talk about it, and I would say volunteerism, I would categorize that under gimilut chasadim, right, acts of kindness. And there was one text that I came across that talked about that actually these acts of kindness, gimilut chasadim, are actually even better than giving tzedakah, because with tzedakah, you just give it with your money. But gimilut chasadim, there's this aspect of money, but there's also this aspect of yourself and your body, right? You're giving yourself. You are, you're working at it like physically, and so that's definitely very valued and very prized, and we have a lot of sources around that. So just to say that this wasn't to say, oh, like tzedakah is more important. That was just kind of what we were covering today. But that, yes, definitely acts of kindness and volunteerism are important. And just like we don't want people to give money when they can't afford it, there are definitely other options and other ways that are really valued in our tradition. So thank you for raising that up.
Yeah, I'll just add to there, right? That's one of the interesting things about tzedakah is that it's a percentage of what we have that we're required to give. And it's different than for different people, right? We don't expect someone who has very little to give with somebody who has a lot to do. The rabbis don't expect that at all, but to give proportionally, which I think makes sense. And I love the idea, again, from the very first text, Rabbi Walker shared, that even the poor person, right, has still an obligation to give, because there's always somebody that's more needy. But there's a great example I came across in the sources that didn't come up tonight of fulfilling that obligation. Two people who both don't have a lot, essentially each giving each other the same thing, right? They made a trade so they could both fulfill the thing. And then at the end of the day, they both had the exact same as they started, except they had a little bit of each other. So there's something there about that connection. But again, what Rabbi Walker said, there's a great verse, right? Ashloshah devarim al haTorah ve'al avodah ve'al gimilut chasadim. The world stands on three things: on Torah, on service, and on acts of loving kindness. Right? Tzedakah is important, but going out and doing something, that's the foundation. I think tzedakah falls into that larger category of gimilut chasadim, but it's not the only expression of it, and certainly volunteering. And the last part is, I know for me personally, writing a check, it feels good for the moment, but when you're with people and you see the appreciation, I think that's a much more rewarding experience. So I think volunteering is tremendous, and we all should do more of it. Sadly, we can't be at a lot of things face to face right now. I think, Rabbi, it's time maybe? Seems like it's...
Yeah, I think that is. Thank you for your questions and your comments in the chat, and for being here. And yeah, grateful for you. And hopefully we'll see you next Wednesday, 7:30.
Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you. Be well, everyone.